Good evening, I'm Mitzi Borromeo, and this is News Cafe. We kick off 2015 with a bang with a wonderfully fierce and fiery guest, Tony Award-winning playwright, performer, and activist EVE ENSLER. She is the author of the Vagina Monologues, which has been translated into over 48 languages, performed in over 140 countries, and has launched a global movement to end violence against women. Great to have you on the show, Eve. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thrilled to be here.
It's been such a busy time for you. I mean, you've been going around the world. You're in India. How has it been so far in the Philippines for you?
Oh, I love being in the Philippines for many reasons. One, because I'm very, very close to Monique, Wilson, and Rosanna, and I love being with them so much. But I also really am so profoundly inspired and moved by the Gabriella movement here and my Gabriella sisters and the incredible work they're doing with the base, with the grassroots, with women who they are helping and really joining forces with to organize against the incredible poverty, the incredible, you know, many, many forms of oppressions that 85% of this country is facing. So I love being here, and I love being joined in solidarity with the Gabriella movement and all the groups that are part of that movement.
Now, last December, you spent a whole day dancing with them as part of your 1 Billion Rising Revolution tour. What was that like? Meeting new women, maybe seeing some of the old ones you had met before?
Well, I feel very close to a lot of the leaders in Gabriella, but I think that day was both very, very inspiring and also very sad. Because there were plays and performances done which really revealed the stories and lives and conditions that women are living in. And I think you can hear things from afar, but when you're seeing actual community members talking about the fact that they're living communities that are constantly underwater, and that when they were younger, the water reached a certain point, and now the water's getting higher and higher based on global warming and this catastrophic global corporate capitalist system we're living in. Listening to women from the Payetas, where I spent time 2 years ago, whose existence is just, it's impossible to even imagine. I mean, the idea that people are living in garbage sites, that they have to get permits in order to get a right to scavenge for a mere 70 cents a day that they may make, that the toxicity of the garbage, you know, that they find themselves in the garbage, they feel like garbage. What kind of world are we living in where so many people, and then the escalating violence that's on top of those conditions, you know, the sexual violence and all the kind of violences that spread from that.
It's an environment that kind of breeds that culture.
Absolutely, because where people don't have, and also I think hearing stories that, you know, about this horrible situation of the transgendered woman who was murdered by the you know, U.S. forces, and was kind of, and all this immunity that's gone on with the visiting forces agreement. All these stories combine to make life very, very hard here for people on the ground.
That's right. A lot of difficult stories to contend with, and I will ask you about that later. Now, let's step back a little, and I'd like to talk about you before all of this, before Vagina Monologues, the V-Day movement. A good friend of yours, broadcast journalist Laura Flanders, wrote a very wonderful article about you, and she talked about how back in the day you were demonstrating against the Reagan administration's resumption of nuclear testing, and she said you danced, you laughed, you even got arrested. So that was the start, sort of, big activism. What was that time like for you?
Well, I always say that I hold Ronald Reagan totally responsible for the downfall of human civilization, at least American civilization, because, you know, he was really the president and that administration that ushered in the time of self-interest, the me, individualism, the yuppie mentality. But he was also talking very much about the fact that a nuclear war was winnable. I don't know if you remember those days. And that really escalated a very strong anti-nuke movement in the United States, which I was very much a part of, because I really was obsessed and possessed with nuclear nightmares. And I just couldn't believe we had a president who was actually saying that a nuclear war was winnable. I mean, it was so untenable in the imagination. And yes, I spent a lot of time in the streets, mobilizing, getting arrested, tying myself to fences. I was at the Nevada nuclear test site where we were, you know, we were actually performing. I had written a play for Shirley Knight that Joanne Woodward had directed, and we toured it all around America at military installations. We performed it for Congress. And I think those days, you know, were really powerful days where I learned about grassroots organizing, where I learned about art and activism coming together, where I learned about guerrilla-based organizing. And, you know, unfortunately, we've been protesting ever since, and we'll continue to.
Right. Now, at the time, Laura also said that at that time you were already thinking of these stories of women, and you had never spoken about the vagina with her, she said, but you were looking for stories, happy stories for women. But you seem to have been driven by this because also looking back at your childhood, you were born to a middle-class family in New York, right?
Right.
And as a child, you were abused by your father, and this somehow served as a fuel to really get you through your advocacy. Is this what drove you to come up to look for these stories of women, pockets of different versions of violence or abuse of women around the world?
I think there's two tracks. I think I've always been deeply interested in people's stories. You know, I was one of those people who I would just make people tell me their story all the time when I was a child. I mean, part of it was just profound curiosity. Part of it was seeking a world outside the violent confines of my own childhood. And part of it was just, I love stories. I've always loved stories. And I think growing up in a very violent family, but also with the middle class, you know, screen around it and the middle class mirage. So you look like you're living the life everybody dreams of, but inside that is this other really terrible story that's going on. I was always really confused by the inside outside, and I think I was really hungering to find a way to put those stories together. Mm-hmm. So there wasn't this split between, I think so many people are living dichotomous existence, where they tell one story about themselves, or you hear the story of Bill Cosby, for example,
right,
who's this great performer, did so much in the industry, and meanwhile, how many women have come forward to say he drugged them and raped them? Or you just look at splits everywhere. And I think so much of, storytelling or art is how do we bring secrets and lies and raise them to the surface so that we begin to really tell the true stories that are going on. Yeah. And I think that motivated a lot of that curiosity.
So at 43, this is when you wrote the Vagina Monologues. Basically, this is the time you had spoken to so many women, and you found that here was a story. At the time, I mean, no one could even say the word, and it was because of you that people actually felt comfortable about themselves. What was it like going through this experience of digging up people's stories and then you yourself acting these things out on stage?
Well, I always say, you know, I've never met a woman who didn't want to talk about her vagina. You know, I mean, it's really, and mainly because no one's ever asked them before. So when I first started doing this, I had no intention of writing a play about vaginas. I was already a fairly marginalized playwright because I was doing political plays, writing about homeless and nuclear war and anti-Reagan plays. And then I had a conversation with a friend who was going through menopause, who was talking about her vagina, which you'll do if you're going through menopause. And she said so many, and she was a feminist, and she just said things that really shocked me. So I realized right then, I didn't really know what women thought about their vaginas. So I just said casually to a friend, and she started saying wild kind of incredible things. And then she, you know, as women do, she would say, oh, well, you should talk to so-and-so. She has an incredible story. And before I knew it, I was kind of sucked down this vagina trail, and I'm still waiting to get off it. But I think what happened over the process of listening to those stories, first of all, I was shocked by how many women had never told anyone their stories before. And they range from women who had never had sexual satisfaction, to women who had had good stories but didn't have a way to tell anybody about those stories, women who had longings and yearnings but couldn't voice those, to women who had had very bad stories and suffered sexual violence. And it was all very interesting, and I was taking notes but had no intention of writing a play. And then I interviewed an older woman who had had a very shameful experience when she was a young woman and had never had sex again. And I went, that is just not acceptable. And I was so moved that I then wrote a monologue based on that. And that was really the beginning, because I began to understand that what I was hearing was universal, and that it was much broader, and the spectrum, for example, of violence was much more profound than I had ever imagined. You know, I knew there was violence. I had no idea it was epidemic.
Yeah. when you saw how the people reacted to this in the world. I mean, translated into how many languages, and you saw the reception of this. You never really wanted to be it wasn't a plan to be a global activist.
Well, I've always been an activist, but it wasn't a plan to be a global. The Vagina Monologues, there was no plan.
Yeah.
I have to say, everything that's happened with it has happened to me, as opposed to because of me. I mean, I feel like I went out and I created literary pieces, which were based on women's stories originally. And I think because I had interviewed so many people and then turned them into, literary texts, when I performed them, so many women resonated with them.
Yes.
That then created this whole new energy, which was women needing to tell their stories, women needed to give voice to their feelings, women wanting to release their trauma, which then gave birth to Vide, the movement. So everything's kind of organically tumbled in to the next thing.
Yes, it's wonderful. When you're passionate about what you do, things just kind of fall into place, huh? Now, so much more fascinating stories to share. We'll just take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk to Eve about the tension she experienced between being an artist and an activist. Welcome back to News Cafe. We're talking to playwright, performer, and activist Eve Ensler. All right, Eve, we were talking about some of your early activist days. Now, of these early days, you once said, I was confused about being an activist and an artist. They seemed to be at odds because you said theater people had problems with me for being political. The political people had problems with me for being artistic. What exactly was the situation like?
Well, I think sometimes that patriarchy has managed to divide things up into these neat categories, activism over here, artist over there. And I've just never seen that, or been that. I've always felt like those two things flow to me very organically. But when you are writing a play, and the world of the literary world and the theatrical world, we've been told, is for the imagination, it's for exploration, it's not for polemics, it's not for anything didactic. And for me, that's just never how it's come to me. I feel like if we're going to use our imagination, shouldn't it be employed in the direction of transformation and making the world better for as many people as we can make it better for? I've just never been able to say, oh, well, here's a thought, there it is. Where's the thought taking us? Yeah. Here's a vision, where's the vision taking us? So that's what runs through me, and that's been who I am. So it's been hard because, when I was younger, I was not very good at balancing the two, and I seemed to have a tendency to beat people over the head with my ideas. And I'm sure there are people who still feel that way about me, and that's okay, because I accept who I am today. But I think as I've grown older, I've really employed humor. Yeah. I found that it really works well if you want to deliver ideas and you want to deliver concepts and political messages. If you get people laughing, it seems much easier for people to take things in. And I think with the Vagina Monologues, it was a way that those two streams came together, because I think it's both poignant and funny and disturbing and sexy and all those things, but there's also definitely a message underneath that, which is, I think there are many messages. But I think it was the first time where I was able to do it where people weren't scared of the message or where they also embraced the art. Yes. Where both things happen simultaneously. Right.
And most people are familiar with the Vagina Monologues, but you have such an extensive body of work, and I'd like to mention some of them. You talked about security in a book called Insecure at Last, Losing It in a Security-Obsessed World. So this is really a meditation on American illusions about safety. I mean, suddenly everybody was paranoid after 9/11. Explain to us what this was really all about.
Well, I remember being in New York, right after 9/11. And I remember immediately hundreds of us gathered at my house and we started this group called New Yorkers Say No to War, because we knew that the administration would use what happened in 9/11 to fuel and begin to escalate war. And in fact, it was a terrorist attack. It was a group of individuals. It wasn't a country that attacked us. It wasn't a war. Yeah. It never was a war. But it got framed as a war and described as a war, which began this huge escalation and excuse for intervention, imperialistic operations throughout the world. And I think there were many of us who knew that this formation of security was going to go a long way in both creating a whole force of military operations that would then do covert operations and secret surveillances and private assassinations, which we've now seen multiplied. But it would also begin to create a surveillance system, which Edward Snowden and others have revealed, which people now support because it makes them feel secure. So my feeling was, and I've always felt this, that the security has never been the point of my life. It's a hopeless enterprise. We're going to die.
Yeah.
Like, why are we after security? It seems ludicrous, you know. And that book was really an attempt to say, insecure at last. Let's be insecure. Let's embrace our insecurity and see if we might be after something different. Yeah. Maybe we're after connection. Maybe we're after care. Maybe we're after looking at the inordinate imbalance between wealthy and poor on this planet, that the 1% has everything and the 99% have nothing. Maybe we want to look at the disaster that we're wreaking on the earth. Maybe we want to look at the rate of violence against women that is but security? Is that what we're going to spend our time seeking when in fact there is no security? What's secure? I woke up 5 years ago and I had a tumor the size of a mango inside me. There it was. Okay, tell me how I'm going to be secure. You're going to predict that you're not going to have a tumor one day, or you're not going to drop dead from a heart attack, your planes. It's going to happen. So give up the idea and live in the path of freedom, live in the path of experience, live in the path of love. It's such a more interesting place.
Focus your energy elsewhere, huh?
Because where does security lead people? It leads to
more insecurity.
To more insecurity. It leads to overconsumption. It leads to thinking that money is somehow going to fix it, and if you get enough money and you get enough prestige and you get enough power, most of those people are miserable. Do you know, what if we actually said that was not what we're after here? What if we were after our hearts being broken open by people, or feeling compassion for people, or looking at the fact that this Christmas, there are people sleeping in the pailletas, right? While other people are in the malls having a gorgeous time. What if that security were transformed into another kind of compassion?
Well, for your own personal example, you did bring it up when you discovered you had cancer. I mean, at the time you said you were ignoring it because you were so busy at the time. And later when people had asked you, do you think that somehow it made you mortality has a way of making you review your life? And at that time, you realized you were ignoring yourself. You weren't really comfortable. What was that like, that moment when you decided, okay, I'm going to just face this insecurity? And when you realized you had cancer, how did it change your life?
Well, I think I'd given up the notion of security. I think I gave it up at a very early age when my father would throw me against the wall. I got right then that life wasn't totally secure. But I think I think all understandings come in stages of revelation, right, and deepening. When I got cancer, when I woke up with cancer, of course it was shocking. And of course I was scared on the level that I didn't want to die. I loved being alive. But I also, for me, it was such a profound experience, the whole journey of cancer and the whole treatment of cancer. It burned away the last vestiges I had, really, of believing that I was separate from anything around me. You know, like when I was in the middle of an infection, the oil spill happened in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was literally in my body. You know, there wasn't anything around me that wasn't happening to me. And I think we have this false notion that we are separate, you know, from our environment, from each other, from the world, from the things that are happening to us, and we had these incredible abilities to deny things. But in fact, what cancer did for me is it just tore down that wall of denial, and it kind of landed me in the sea, the messy, delicious, frightening, wondrous sea of whatever this reality is.
Now, another book that you wrote, in 2010, you wrote, I Am an Emotional Creature, The Secret Life of Girls Around the World. This was a workshop in New York and even in South Africa. Now, the play explores the lives of girls, sexual abuse, their relationships with power. You wanted to also spark some kind of movement. What exactly was this particular play?
Well, I Am an Emotional Creature began because I was really interested in teenage girls. And I still am. I think they are like the fiercest kind of power base we have on the planet. You know, they are alive, they are emotional, they're smart, they're intuitive, they're practical, and they're passionate, you know. And I think So much of our lives we're told, tone it down, you're being too intense, you're being hysterical, you're being emotional. And I think this piece was my attempt to say, no, 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 rise to our occasion, stop muting us. You just need to be more emotional, more intense, more political, more passionate. We don't need to shut ourselves up.
Yeah.
And when I wrote that piece, it was really based on stories and imaginations that I'd had of girls around the world. And it's since gone on to be performed, you know, in Paris, in San Francisco, in New York. And we just did fantastic productions of it in South Africa, in Johannesburg, and Cape Town. And now it's being, in India, it's been performed in a lot of places. And it's really exciting to see young women, young teenage girls performing and getting up on that stage and occupying that stage and being powerful on that stage and voicing their stories.
It was interesting, during the rehearsals, you heard about a certain Pakistani girl, Malala Yousafzai, who was shot. I mean, how did you feel then? Because it made you very emotional when you heard this happen.
Well, it was actually the first day of rehearsal in New York when she got shot. And what I feel about Malala and what I feel about so many young women on the planet, you know, the obstacles that girls are facing, particularly around education, particularly around how do they even get to school in certain communities, around sexual violence. I spent a lot of time in the Congo, and I look at what young girls are facing in terms of poverty, in terms of war, in terms of like mass rape that's being used as a tactic of war. You know, I think the conditions of girls on this planet are so, and even if we look to more escalated concerns that aren't as difficult, they're still very difficult, whether they're eating disorders, whether they're gangs, which make you feel less than because you don't have the right clothes or you don't look the right way, whether it's girls in factories, right, who are being charged with child labor to make toys like Barbies that get exported to other girls. And what is a Barbie? Barbie is some distorted dysmorphic idea of what girls are supposed to look like, which then becomes a form of torture for the rest of their lives. So you have girls who are making Barbies for child labor wages, or no wages, who even knows, in horrible conditions in factories, who are exporting this doll so they can then become torturous to girls around the world. So that's the kind of metaphor, I think.
Fascinating, Eve. I want to go on, but we need to take a quick break. When we come back, Eve will tell us what we need to stop being polite about and well-behaved about, and why we need to be hysterical. Welcome back to News Cafe. We have Eve Ensler at the table on this New Year's Day. All right, Eve, you said that we've all learned to be so well-behaved and polite, and we should be hysterical about sexual violence. Why? Why did you say this?
Well, I think one of the biggest obstacles we face is how the most terrible things have been made ordinary, right? We're talking about now on the planet, 1 out of 3 women will be beaten or raped in her lifetime. How did we get here? How did we get here? We got here because the conditions that patriarchy develops silence us, make us accept this violence, make us feel there's no outlet, make us feel like it's something wrong with us, make us feel like we've done something to bring it onto ourselves. And I think part of how we break out of that mandate and we break out of that structure is that we begin to give voice and we really begin to speak out and tell stories and go against what is happening. And I think it's very hard to do that when you don't have a model for that, when you don't have a community for that. It's very hard if you're on your own. I think one of the reasons I love Gabriella so much is they are a community, so that they teach and they work with women all across this country how to give voice to their struggle, how to give voice to their stories, how to feel they have a right and value to stand up against the payetas. They have a right and value to stand up a lack of support and lack of any kind of care that came after Taliban. You know, I've really been paying quite a lot of attention to the situation in Taliban because we were really happy that our Billion Rising activists really rose to the occasion to send support. But really, what has this government done for the people in Taliban? where's the care? Where's the follow-up? Where's the concern? So if we don't empower people and support people and encourage people to be misbehaved, they will simply die in the scarcity and the lack and in the abandonment. And I think part of what we have to teach women to do, particularly because I think we're all so polite and we're all so behaved and we all know how to do, we're so good, aren't we? Our goodness is getting us murdered. Our goodness is getting us abandoned and left look how little electricity there was in Tacloban. What happens to women in the dark? We know what happens to women in the dark. Look at all the ways in which, you know, when I was here the last time at the Pailletas, and I was looking at the condition of girls who at that time were being forced to sell their bodies in the morning to get a right, you know, to scavenge from the truck drivers. That has since changed due to OBR. But what are we going to do to change those conditions? And the only thing I know to do is to organize, to unite, and to speak out with everything we have. And I think part of that is breaking this silence and code that women have of being well behaved.
Well, about what you're doing, Amy Goodman, host of Democracy Now!, an award-winning journalist, said about you, Eve does not stop. She maintains a drumbeat and she creates community wherever she goes. She leaves a place and there's a community behind her. And this is what you've done. Really, when Monique Wilson was here, she was also talking about 1 Billion Rising here and the pockets of community and the women that you've really inspired. When you come back all around the world and you see these women, what does it feel? Because like you said, you never planned this, but when you see all of that, what comes to mind? I mean, is this really what your life's meaning? Is this what it's about?
Well, you know, I feel so blessed to be in this global community of women. You know, whether it's Africa, whether we're in Swaziland, whether we're in Congo, whether just all across India, Bangladesh, Guatemala, Mexico, Kenya. We have the most extraordinary women activists on the ground doing the daily work of keeping communities alive. And by the way, those women are keeping all of us alive. We don't recognize them, we don't see them, we don't value them. We value a performer who gets up and says one word about feminism, you know, but we don't see the women on the ground who do this work every single hour of every single day, who don't get paid a dime to do it, who do it from their hearts, from their guts, from their bodies, because that's what they care about. And I think my privilege is I get to be in solidarity and sisterhood and friendship with all those women, and I get to be in a movement where we are hopefully lifting the conditions and the stories of women around the world. And you know, what could be better than that? Shopping? Buying a pocketbook? I mean, I really feel the most important thing that in many ways that can happen now is that the people who have need to wake up. The middle classes and the very rich need to wake up. It is not good enough to say you don't know what's going on. You need to find out what's going on. If you don't know that political prisoners are taken in this country, you need to wake up and find that out. If you don't know that people in Tacloban have been abandoned, you need to wake up and find out. If you don't know that people are living in garbage in the Pailletas, you need to go there and sit with those people. Those are your sisters and brothers. And because you had the fortune to have money or to make money, it does not make you special, it makes you lucky. And that transformation is so important, because if the people who have do not turn around and feel solidarity with the people who don't, the possibility of all of us transforming becomes minimized.
And you can also participate in different ways. One thing Monique also talked to me about here is dance as a form of being hysterical. And you danced for one day for 1 Billion Rising. What do you think dance is really doing for these communities? Because you know, when you see them, it's empowering, isn't it?
Dance is the most powerful force. When I was dancing the other day with the Gabrielas in the community, it was so both political, sexual, powerful, alive. And I think, you know, when we started doing 1 Billion Rising and invited the whole world to dance in 207 countries and millions of people joined in, people were like, what does dance do? Well, what doesn't dance do? First of all, for women who have been abused, which is 1 out of 3 women, you reclaim public space, you move your body. When you dance, you release trauma. So what that means is all of this bad toxic energy that's been pushing your energy down gets released, so that you begin to come back into your intuition, your thoughts, your vision, your power. What it also does is it creates community without words. And sometimes we all get hung up on our politics and on our this and that's, but when you're dancing, you feel your humanity. You feel your life force pulsing together. So I hope everyone will come out this 14th in the Philippines and around the world and dance for 1 billion rising revolution.
Because you did that last year. Now this is the revolution,
yes.
isn't it? So
we are escalating this year.
Yes.
Because last year was the call for justice. And I think in many ways we've been waiting to see the powers that were called upon, whether they're delivering that justice. And if they're not this year, we're going to push further.
Right. Now, of course, you mentioned V-Day. This has been staged all over. So you've been to Israel, Palestine, Egypt, Jordan, met so many wonderful women. Are there particular ones that, I know it's a difficult question, but that stand out? Some that have really seared themselves into your head? And even working also with these A-list stars. I mean, you've worked also with people like Glenn Close. Monique Wilson has brought in many great Filipino personalities to the stage. What has it been like working with these women?
Well, I think there's so many experiences I've had, ranging from the first time Jane Fonda ever performed my work, where she was one of my iconic heroes. But I think really the places that have really touched me, when they performed the Vagina Monologues in the European Union, European Parliament last year, when I saw Haitian actors recently perform it at the in Creole at the Haitian Parliament. When I saw women in Pakistan perform it for their Afghani sisters. When they performed it here in the Parliament and actually got laws passed because of it. I think where I've seen the most unlikely people perform the show, whether it's people who are working women who work at a telephone company and end up performing the moans and suddenly become wildly empowered, or whether I've seen young girls who have never known anything about their bodies or their histories perform the show and come up to me and say, I love my body, I love my vagina, I feel it's mine. You know, or boys who have come up to me across the world to say that the Vagina Monologues really changed their idea of women, really changed how they approached their girlfriend and saw their wife, and gave them tools. I remember a guy came up to me once and said his girlfriend had been raped and he didn't know how to talk to her about it. And after he saw the show, he became much more tender and compassionate. So I think, I mean, I feel like I could sit here and go on for days about the amazing things that I've witnessed in the places.
Not enough time.
You know, really. But it's been amazing.
Yeah. I remember watching the Vagina Monologues here, and many of us here in school, we are not allowed to have sex education. And for me, that was a milestone moment because that was my sex education.
Can we talk about sex education? No, I want to talk about it. I really feel like I'm on this mission now, but here's the deal. Why do we have so much violence? Why is there so much violence? I think there are many reasons for it. Obviously, patriarchy brings up our boys to be very disassociated from their hearts. It tells them to man up, be a guy, don't have feelings, don't feel. So by the time they're 16 and 17, they've cut off their hearts. And that has a lot to do with it. But I also think we don't teach sex.
That's right.
We think, you know, we teach math, we teach English, we teach, you know, chemistry. Why do we think people are going to be born knowing how to have good sex? Because they don't. So I think what happens is when boys are like teenagers and they're feeling insecure and they're feeling like, oh my God, I've got to show that I'm a guy, the first thing they do is jump on a girl. And she's like, okay, this is hell. This is sex. This is a nightmare. And then we begin this pattern of sexual misery. What if we were bringing children up and teaching them what good sex was, what reciprocity is, what consent means, what delicious touch is, what women like, what boys like? Would we be living in a completely different world? 70% of boys learn about sex for the first time from pornography. Is that what we want to be teaching boys? You know, is that what we, and isn't the prudishness of the church really leading boys to that? What if we actually said sex is beautiful? It's a gorgeous thing. It's a crucial part of life. And we stopped pretending people aren't having it, but actually embraced it and then taught it as something that is beautiful and can be reciprocal and make everybody happy.
Eve, I'm putting you on the Department of Education.
I'm there. I'm there.
A good thought to ponder. Time for another break. News Cafe. We'll be right back. Stay with us. This is News Cafe, and I'm joined by Eve Ensler. Eve, you were just talking to me about this culture that kind of allows men to take advantage of women. And you once said that nothing will change until women are economically equal. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think it's very true. If I was reading a statistic, excuse me, today in the paper, in the Times, which was looking at all the focus, for example, on sexual violence on college campuses in America, which is fantastic. But what the article was saying is the majority of people who are sexually violated in America are not on college campuses. The majority who are violated are people who are economically disadvantaged. And all the statistics show that where women don't have rightful employment, where they don't have economic independence, where they don't have economic value, their sexual rights are diminished and there is much more violence. So part of what I think we have to look at if we're really going to eradicate sexual violence is how do we lift the conditions of women? And how do we make sure women are getting employed in really good jobs? How do we make sure that the conditions women are working in, for example, in the restaurant business in the United States, which is now at substandard wage, $2.10 an hour, which it has been for the last 30 years, by the way, women are completely dependent on tips. Well, dependency on tips escalates sexual harassment because where you are dependent on the tip, you have to tolerate more and more intolerable behavior. So what if we create conditions for women where their situations are not based on sexual abuse and sexual violence, but where they're getting paid the wages that they deserve? And you look across the board at the work that women do. Their wages are always less, and they're underpaid for the work that most people don't want to do. I had a friend years ago who told me we should pay the most for the work we don't want to do. And I really feel that's true. If you're head of a corporation, you should be making the least money because you have prestige and you have power. The people who are not having those jobs should get the most money because they're doing the work you don't want to do. And I think I think the longer I'm in this movement to end violence against women, the more I see that the economic exploitation of women is the core ingredient, and racism, which is a huge factor, and of course imperialism. I mean, all those ingredients create a very toxic situation for women.
I've learned so much from you today. I mean, just by you saying that sometimes we allow this culture to eat us up. For example, Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook. Isn't she one of your board? Is she on the board?
Yes, she's on our board.
She had a book, Lean In, and she encourages women to ask for it when you want to ask for a raise. Why is it that women feel they are not entitled, whereas men will easily ask for a raise or benefits? So women in the workplace should also be able to feel they're entitled, for example.
Absolutely. I think what we do as women, we give everything away. We're so generous. We don't value how much we give and how much we do, and we're so embarrassed to say we have this much value. But I think the truth of the matter is we do 10 times the amount of work that most men do, and we get a quarter of the pay. So I think we need to begin to escalate our own sense of value and our own willingness to make demands.
But there's a tension there too. In that book too, Sheryl said that when women make demands, then they're seen as bossy. Even as a child, oh, look at this bossy girl, but why not? What's wrong? Which is what you've been saying
I say be
today.
bossy and be proud. You know, I think all these labels they put on us, you know, impossible, bossy, the B word, all these things. I just say own it, take it, because if a man does the same thing, they're called competent, a leader, clear, definite, and I think part of it is just having each other's backs as we stand up and demand what we are entitled to. And it's not more than we're entitled to. We're actually just asking what we're entitled to.
Exactly. So things are really changing, and because of you, your movement has also really done a lot for the world.
Well, our movement. It's not my movement.
True.
This is our movement.
Thank you for bringing, our movement. That's right. All the sisters in the world.
Exactly.
Now, your latest book, February 2014, you wrote, the title is In the Body of the World, A Memoir of Cancer and Connection, where you call on all of us to embody our connection to and responsibility for the world. What were you trying to really say in this book?
Well, I think In the Body of the World is really looking at, obviously, the connection. I mean, cancer's real and it's also a metaphor, isn't it? There are so many cancers. I mean, cancer is caused by thoughtlessness, it's caused by greed, it's caused by corporate destruction, it's caused by just this kind of deterioration of value and ethics and community. And I think what I learned from cancer is really that in my dissolution of the I into the we is my expansion. And I think so much of our corporate culture or corporate capitalism teaches us it's about me,
Yeah.
me. But all that leads to is sad me, depressed me. The opposite of that seems to me is this expansion into an understanding that we is where we find ourselves. We is where we locate ourselves. We is the home, you know, and I think cancer really did that for me. I was so blessed, obviously, to have insurance, which I know so many people don't have, but also to have incredible medical treatment, the most amazing nurses, the most amazing friends, the most caring. And I don't take that lightly. Like, I understand that I got to live where there are many people on this planet who would not have gotten to live with the same conditions. And I think there's an obligation that comes with that and a responsibility that comes with that. You know, my life is not my own anymore. Yeah. You know, and I'm very happy for that. I'm much happier being surrendered up to this larger community of struggle and service. And, you know, it's where happiness lies.
Well, all this struggle, I mean, at such a young age, what you went through, the difficulties, the cancer, I mean, so many times over, what really kept you going? Where did you find the strength to get through all these difficulties?
Well, you know, I think people are always running away from pain and running away from and what I want to say is go into it, because that's where you'll find your liberation and your salvation. You know, it's in the avoidance of things that you really lose yourself. And what saves me? Love. What saves me? My sisters around the world. What saves me is thinking of Jane, who got up this morning in Congo after suffering the worst atrocities years ago and is giving her love to the women in the City of Joy, this amazing place we created in Congo with the women of Congo. What gets me up in the morning is Monique Wilson, who gets up every day in the Philippines and sings her heart out and is one of the greatest activists I've ever met on the planet and gives her heart for the women and people of this country. What gets me up every morning is Christine Schuler-Scriver, who's leading City of Joy in the midst of a war. What gets me up is Fartun in Somalia and Fahima in Sudan and Agnes in Kenya. I mean, these are the women who teach me what it means to be a human being. And if they can do it, by God, I can do it.
That's right. Putting it in those terms, it's embarrassing even to just not have the energy to get up and do
exactly.
anything. Yeah. One of your latest plays, which is ongoing, OPC, Obsessive Political Correctness, which is an exploration of consumption in politics. I wish we could see that. I wish it would come here.
I hope it will. Well, it just opened at the American Repertory Theater in Cambridge at Harvard, and I'm so excited about it. And the production is running now. I left it to tour for 1 Billion Rising, and I feel a little like separation anxiety. But
tell us about it. What gave you the idea to put this together?
Well, I think in a way the play is an examination of radicals versus liberals. I have my struggles with liberals, because I think sometimes liberals speak the right speak and they talk the right talk and they move the pieces around, but they don't want real change. They don't want to give up anything. Do you know? And I look at the Democratic Party as kind of emblematic of that, you know? And the play is kind of a struggle between a young freegan, which is a girl who lives out of the garbage and is transforming waste, who's a squatter, who's a radical, who's off the grid, and her mother who's running for Senate of the Democratic Party. And it's really looking at, is the way forward reform, where you're making tiny adjustments within the system, or is it radical revolutionary change? And that is the dialectic of the play. And I don't have a prescriptive answer, because I think sometimes when we go further out on the left, we impact the middle, and that brings the middle further to the left, and it actually brings about change. And I think there obviously have to be people inside the structure who are impacting the structure, but I think those of us on the outside can constantly be impacting them. Like, for example, they just banned fracking in New York. And I think that's a perfect example of activists pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing till finally government took a position and changed policy. And I think we need both, but I also think there is something about just recycling and people believing that that's all they need to do that keeps liberals off the hook. And I think all of us need to think much more deeply, what are we really doing to bring about change? Because the earth is going to throw us off pretty soon if we don't. And also, I look at my sisters and brothers in the north who are really responsible for a lot that's happening in the global south. If we look at the Philippines, the kind of storms and the storm surges that are hitting us, we are very responsible in the north and in the west for the consumption that is causing those storms. So we're all part of this story, and we've all got to look at our piece of responsibility in that story.
Well, that is a great thought, to be more conscious in the way we live. Great thought for the new year. Now, of course, February 14, 2015, something you're working towards. What can we expect to see then? What's going to happen with OBR? Maybe more for the V-Day movement?
Well, I'm very excited about 1 Billion Rising Revolution, and I know it will be amazing in the Philippines. I have to say, I think the Philippines is one of the most powerfully rising countries and I think it has a lot to do with Gabriela. I think they are probably one of the best organized movements I've seen on the planet, and I've been to a lot of places. So I'm very excited about the risings that will be happening here in the Philippines. But all over the planet, we're going to be seeing incredible revolutionary events. We're doing a very fantastic thing in New York. We're having a revolutionary artistic uprising where we're having, it's kind of like a revolutionary dress-up ball where you come dressed as your revolutionary with singers and performers and poets. And I think this year is going to be a very big combination between artists who are writing pieces. There's a new brilliant OBR song in the Philippines that I just heard. It's fantastic with a whole new dance. And we were seeing poets, we're seeing artists, we're seeing drummers. Drumming is huge this year. But I also think, what is your revolution is the big question. What is my revolution? What is your revolution? What does it look like? Is my revolution to make a commitment that I am going to go out and wake up and look at how much money I have and what I'm doing with that money in relationship to people who don't have money? Is my revolution going out and working with men as a man to transform the consciousness of men so that they really are sensitive to violence against women? Everybody's got to look inside to see what is your personal revolution, and then what is your we revolution, where you are hooking it up with other people for real change.
Wonderful. Well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Eve. So inspiring to spend the new year
opening
with you.
Oh, so great to talk to you. Really
We'll have
wonderful.
you again when you're back.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Eve. And that's it for News Cafe tonight. Thanks to our guest, EVE ENSLER, for ushering the new year with us. I'm Mitzi Borromeo. Thanks for watching. Happy New Year. Good night. Good evening, I'm Mitzi Borromeo, and this is News Cafe. We kick off 2015 with a bang with a wonderfully fierce and fiery guest, Tony Award-winning playwright, performer, and activist EVE ENSLER. She is the author of the Vagina Monologues, which has been translated into over 48 languages, performed in over 140 countries, and has launched a global movement to end violence against women. Great to have you on the show, Eve. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thrilled to be here.
It's been such a busy time for you. I mean, you've been going around the world. You're in India. How has it been so far in the Philippines for you?
Oh, I love being in the Philippines for many reasons. One, because I'm very, very close to Monique, Wilson, and Rosanna, and I love being with them so much. But I also really am so profoundly inspired and moved by the Gabriela movement here and my Gabriela sisters and the incredible work they're doing with the base, with the grassroots, with women who they are helping and really joining forces with to organize against the incredible poverty, the incredible, you know, many, many forms of oppressions that 85% of this country is facing. So I love being here, and I love being joined in solidarity with the Gabriela movement and all the groups that are part of that movement.
Now, last December, you spent a whole day dancing with them as part of your 1 Billion Rising Revolution tour. What was that like? Meeting new women, maybe seeing some of the old ones you had met before?
Well, I feel very close to a lot of the leaders in Gabriela, but I think that day was both very, very inspiring and also very sad. Because there were plays and performances done which really revealed the stories and lives and conditions that women are living in. And I think you can hear things from afar, but when you're seeing actual community members talking about the fact that they live in communities that are constantly underwater, and that when they were younger, the water reached a certain point, and now the water's getting higher and higher based on global warming and this catastrophic global corporate capitalist system we're living in. Listening to women from the Payetas, where I spent time 2 years ago, whose existence is just, it's impossible to even imagine. I mean, the idea that people are living in garbage sites, that they have to get permits in order to get a right to scavenge for a mere 70 cents a day that they may make, that the toxicity of the garbage, you know, that they find themselves in the garbage, they feel like garbage. What kind of world are we living in where so many people, and then the escalating violence that's on top of those conditions, you know, the sexual violence and all the kind of violences that spread from that.
It's an environment that kind of breeds that culture.
Absolutely, because where people don't have, and also I think hearing stories that, you know, about this horrible situation of the transgendered woman who was murdered by the you know, U.S. forces, and was kind of, and all this immunity that's gone on with the visiting forces agreement. All these stories combine to make life very, very hard here for people on the ground.
That's a lot of difficult stories to contend with, and I will ask you about that later. Now, let's step back a little, and I'd like to talk about you before all of this, before Vagina Monologues, the V-Day movement. A good friend of yours, broadcast journalist Laura Flanders, wrote a very wonderful article about you, and she talked about how back in the day you were demonstrating against the Reagan administration's resumption of nuclear testing, and she said you danced, you laughed, you even got arrested. So that was the start, sort of, a big activism. What was that time like for you?
Well, I always say that I hold Ronald Reagan totally responsible for the downfall of human civilization, at least American civilization, because, you know, he was really the president and that administration that ushered in the time of self-interest, the me, individualism, the yuppie mentality. But he was also talking very much about the fact that a nuclear war was winnable. I don't know if you remember those days. And that really escalated a very strong anti-nuke movement in the United States, which I was very much a part of, because I really was obsessed and possessed with nuclear nightmares. And I just couldn't believe we had a president who was actually saying that a nuclear war was winnable. I mean, it was so untenable in the imagination. And yes, I spent a lot of time in the streets, mobilizing, getting arrested, tying myself to fences. I was at the Nevada nuclear test site where we were, you know, we were actually performing. I had written a play for Shirley Knight that Joanne Woodward had directed, and we toured it all around America at military installations, and we performed it for Congress. And I think those days, you know, were really powerful days where I learned about grassroots organizing, where I learned about art and activism coming together, where I learned about guerrilla-based organizing. And, you know, unfortunately, we've been protesting ever since, and we'll continue to.
Right. Now, at the time, Laura also said that at that time, you were already thinking of these stories of women, and you had never spoken about the vagina with her, she said, but you were looking for stories, happy stories for women. But you seem to have been driven by this because also looking back at your childhood, you were born to a middle-class family in New York, right? And as a child, you were abused by your father, and this somehow served as a fuel to really get you through your advocacy. Is this what drove you to come up to look for these stories of women, pockets of, you know, different versions of violence or abuse of women around the world?
I think there's two tracks. I think I've always been deeply interested in people's stories. You know, I was one of those people